Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to the Jelly Musa's Cafe. I am your hostess, Yemima. I am Yemima, your Jelly Musa. It is a wonderful, beautiful, beautiful evening. It's kind of cool here. I am broadcasting out of Virginia, and it's, kind of cool here. I hope wherever you are having a wonderful evening. And I hope that the weather is gorgeous wherever you are. Before we get started, I always like to pay homage to my ancestors, those known and unknown, my beloved ancient ancestors, as well as my recently departed ancestors, to my mother's lineage, back to Mali, Africa, of the Tuareg Nation, and to my father's lineage, back to Guinea-Bissau of the Balansa Nation. I say Abene, Benyamin Yowale. I say Shukra Kelnad, Abene, Abene, Abene. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, ancestors, for giving me wisdom. Thank you for allowing me to hear your voice and to speak your words and to tell your stories and to tell them in fullness and with clarity. Thank you for allowing my heart to still feel your love, to still feel your support. Thank you for touching my hands. I know that whatever work I do with your assistance, that everything that I do with the help of the ancestors will succeed. Thank you for grounding me. Thank you for keeping my feet secure and that my steps have been ordered. I say Amen, I say Ashe, and I say Faye. So, good evening again. So tonight's episode is entitled, We Are Our Ancestors. About maybe 2-3 years ago, maybe in 2019 was when the Terror, or 2020, when the Karen Terror began, when Karen was popping up every other day. You can't sell water, you can't barbecue, do you live here, what are you doing here, da 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 da. And I don't even call them Karen anymore because I think Karen is too nice of a name. So I've heard other phrases and I've borrowed some and I've created some. And so I would go with either baking soda Becky or cotton ball Brandon, something like that. But so when the Karen reign began, there were a lot of Black people that were saying this in defense or to these Karens. We are not our ancestors. You can catch these hands. They even made T-shirts that said this foolishness, which I think is so disrespectful to the ancestors, because what you're basically saying is that they were docile and they kind of took it on the chin and didn't fight back, which could not be more further than from the truth than that statement that they were docile and didn't fight back. Our ancestors resisted, rebelled, and revolutionized from the beginning. Even in Africa, they resisted, they rebelled, they revolted. There are a lot of slave revolt on the ships that they don't want to talk about. We know about the Amistad, but that wasn't the only one. Our ancestors fought back every day, and sometimes big ways. You have the Nat Turner Rebellion, you have Denmark Vesey, you have Gabriel, you have the Haitian Revolution, but they fought back in so many small ways as well every day. And I'm going to dedicate a full episode to the ancestors and them resisting. But yeah, people were saying I am not my ancestors. Now, if you're going to say I am not my ancestors, if you're going to use that train of thought, that thought method, then connect it to ways that we are not our ancestors. And I'll give you examples of how I know I am not my ancestor. I don't work as hard as they did. And I'm not talking about the physical part, about being out in the fields. I'm talking about creating things, creating ways of surviving. For me, it's kind of like, okay, I get up in the morning and I do my thing. I go to work if I go to work or whatever. But they had to create almost on a daily basis of ways to survive chattel slavery. And some of us can't even survive a call center when they tell you you can't have your phone out on the floor. We can't even survive that. What about not being able to see your children until all of that cotton was picked? Or until you finish the work in the house? No, you can't see your babies. I don't care if it's midnight. So yeah, in those instances, in that way, no, I am not like my ancestors. I need a nap after just going to the mailbox, and it's only 50 feet from me, and sometimes I need a little nap. I'm not like my ancestors in ways of knowing the soil, knowing the earth. Both my sets of grandparents on my mother's side and my father's side were farmers. My mother's parents were sharecroppers, which is just another form of slavery. My grandfather on my father's side was a farmer, which means they knew how to work the earth. They knew how to work with the seasons and the moon and all of those things. I would kill a cactus. I swear, I would kill a cactus. I don't have a green thumb. I can't even imagine trying to grow a garden. And my father had 2 huge gardens, and he was a master when it came to working that soil. He knew how to work it, and he would grow so many crops. And my mother was the mastermind behind preserving the food that was grown. My mother knew how to can food. She knew how to freeze food. She knew how to parboil food and freeze it and things of that nature. I don't know how to do those things. And so in that regard, I'm not like my ancestors. I really wish that I was. But yeah, plants don't come to my house to live. They usually come if they're planning to commit suicide, because that's what's going to happen to them. So I don't have a green thumb. But as for the people who are saying that they are not like their ancestors, they can catch hands. Again, I haven't seen any hands thrown to any of those Karens that came out of the woodwork and still come out. Every day you still see a Karen come out and do something stupid or say something stupid, and I don't see any hands being thrown. Now, in a way that we are like our ancestors. Unfortunately, a lot of ways that we are like our ancestors is we are still being oppressed and enslaved the way our ancestors were. Ours is more of the mind in a lot of ways than physical chains, but chains on our minds. But when it comes to us being deleted and terrorized, we are still under the tyranny of the Tubob. And for those of you who don't know what that is, a Tubob is the word that the Africans called the evil white man. When they saw the white man coming and they saw what they were coming to do, they called them Tubobs. And that name carried through the slave ships, and on the plantation, they called them Tubobs. So unfortunately, we are still being terrorized by them. They just recently passed the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill, and which, okay, I mean, it should have been passed in 1955 when he was lynched, but it's I think it was passed last year, so it's 2022, 2021 when they passed it. And so the thing about that is, it's really just words on a paper. The same way the Emancipation Proclamation really were kind of just words on a paper. They don't have to enforce it. There are plenty of laws on the books they don't enforce. First of all, the FBI has to say that it was a hate crime and that it was an actual lynching. We know they ain't never going to say that. They are never going to say those words that someone was lynched. No. They'll still say murder. They'll still use homicide and murder and things of that nature, but they're not going to say lynch. It was to appease us, and they appeased us, and we were like, yay. But that's not going to happen. Yeah, it's not going to happen. It was a gentleman who was deleted in a southern state back in November of last year. I don't know if you heard about or read about it, but the young man was working for a white man, and they had been kind of bullying him. He was very young. They'd been bullying him, and his boss had got some of his good old boyfriends, and they were really terrorizing him. He went to the police and told the police, these men are bullying, or not bullying, but they are following me and they're threatening me. And the police did nothing. He called his mother and told his mother, he said, Mom, if anything happens to me, these are the men who did it. He gave his mother a description of what they were driving, what they looked like. He said, if anything happens to me, they did it. So he left the town, and apparently they followed him, and his remains were found like 30, 45 days later out in the woods, and he had been dismembered. Now, if that's not a lynching, then I don't know what is. But he had been dismembered, and the police in that state, in that town, said that wild animals had got to him. So he had been lynched, and nothing's done. No one's being held accountable for him. But the ancestors woke me up this morning at 5 o'clock to talk about another way that they were terrorized, and I am seeing it more and more happening, and that is called the whipping post. The whipping post is exactly how it sounds. It's a whipping post. It had been used throughout time, and it was not just used in the United States during the human trafficking period, but it was used in Europe on prisoners who got out of line. They would tie them to the whipping post. The post would stand about 4 feet tall, and they would tie you and they would lash you. They would give you lashes. They used it in the military. If someone was considered a traitor or not really true to their country or to the military, they would tie them to the whipping post and they would give them lashes. Now, the difference in the way they did it there and the way they did it on the plantation is, number one, in Europe and in the military, it was only men. And not saying that that's okay, because it doesn't matter who you are. That is just cruel punishment. But on the plantation, on the forced labor camps here in the United States, it could be anybody. Age and gender didn't matter. It could be your elder grandmother, grandfather. It could be your husband, your wife. It could be your children that could be tied to the whipping posts and whipped. A lot of times they had chains to shackle the feet or the hands. And they would whip you for whatever reason. It could be anything. If you were a self-liberator and they caught you and brought you back, you would get a lash for every mile that you were away from the plantation, from the forced labor camp. If you were pregnant and you still worked in the house, because you had to work in the house if you were pregnant, they would dig a hole in the ground so that the woman could lay on the ground, and they would tie her hands to the whipping post, and they would she would lay belly down and put her belly in this hole because they had to protect their property, and they would whip them, and they would tear the skin literally off of their backs. There were times where they didn't even bother to untie them. They whipped them unto death. And sometimes they would leave them out for a couple of days. Now, another thing with the whipping post on the plantation was when you were tied there, they brought everybody out. They brought people out from the fields. They brought your family out, everybody out of the quarters, everybody out of the house to witness your demise. And again, depending on what your infraction was, that would determine the severity of the whipping. And 2 lashes to me is severe because I can't even imagine. I've never seen anyone whipped. But because I'm a historical interpreter and a storyteller, and I have to tell the ancestors' stories in truth and in wholeness, I have to do a lot of research. And so I've listened to a lot of slave narratives. I've read a lot of slave narratives where they talk extensively about that whipping post and how it tore the skin from your back and how they would sometimes rub salt in the wound. And I don't know if that's where that phrase came from. But a lot of things we do today, a lot of things we say today came out of slavery. But yeah, that's what they would do at the whipping post. Now, we have had 2 young Black men in the past 2.5, 3 years that have been taken to the whipping post. The most recent one is Jordan Neely. For those of you who don't know who he is the young Black man who got on the subway in New York City, I believe. And yeah, New York City. And he got on the subway and he started shouting, which I understand that that's kind of what happens on the subway. He started talking about he was tired and he didn't care if he went to jail and he didn't care if he died. He was tired. And then there were 3 two-bobs that surrounded him and took him down. One wrapped his arms around Mr. Neely's neck. He was an ex-military two-bob. And then the other 2, one held his hands down and one held his feet down. And all of this is happening on the subway and nobody moved. Nobody said boo. Nobody said anything until it was like 8 or 9 minutes. And he did this for 15 minutes. And then some man on the train on the subway said something to the effect of, "Oh man, it's been like 5 or 6 minutes. You know, he's out. You're going to kill him." But nobody moved. And out of the 3 men, only the military man was arrested. I don't know what the outcome was. I think he was released, but I don't know. But he was arrested. And I think he bonded out. But nobody moved. None of those hand-throwing people where they are not their ancestors, nobody moved. The other one was George Floyd. The patty roller kneeled on George Floyd's neck for 7.5 minutes, and people stood around and took pictures and recorded, which is good that they recorded, but still, you got people standing around just kind of watching. So those, we are not our ancestors, you can catch these hands. I don't know where those people were. Certainly not around George Floyd. I'm sure he probably would appreciate it if somebody had threw some hands and helped him out. And in that instance, he called on his ancestor, his mother. But yeah, the whipping post, it is as bad, if not worse, than actual lynchings. We know with lynchings, it's not torture. They may have tortured them prior to the lynching. But the whipping post is one of the most horrible torture devices that they had during the human trafficking period. And because we don't know our history, because it was never taught to us, people can write things and say things to us, about us, in songs, in books, in poems, on television shows, and really take digs at us. And we don't even realize it because we don't know what a lot of these things mean. Give you an example, give you a couple of examples. In the 70s, I think it was the 70s, the group, the Allman Brothers, and I don't know if you've ever heard of them before, they are a rock band. And I think one of them is named Greg Allman, and I think he was either dating Cher or married Cher, I'm not sure. But they were a white rock group back in the 70s and 80s. And they have a song called The Whipping Post. And the chorus of the song, the chorus of the song goes like this. Sometimes I feel like I've been tied to the whipping post. tied to the whipping post, tied to the whipping post. Good Lord, I feel like I'm dying. Now, the basis of the song is about a man who got his heart broke. Some woman broke his heart and broke it so much that he felt like an enslaved African, like he was tied to the whipping post and the skin was torn from his back. Now, for him to even write those lyrics, he had to have understood what the whipping post was. And even if he was referring to the whipping post for a prisoner, still, the torture device of a whipping post. And more Africans met with that whipping post, I'm sure, than any European or any military person did. Because it was one of their ways to torture us. And so he wrote this song. Now, if he had replaced whipping post with feeling like he had been taken to a place in Germany, the song would have never saw the light of day. And it shouldn't have. And it shouldn't have saw the light of day with him talking about being tied to a whipping post because his heart was broken. The second one is by the Rolling Stones. Rolling Stones. They have a song called Brown Sugar. And the song, apparently, I remember hearing the song. I only remember the hook. I don't remember any of the other lyrics to the song. But I do know that Tina Turner sang it with Mick Jagger on stage one night. And so I'm going to read you to, no copyright infringement is intended. This is for educational purposes. The lyrics go, Gold Coast slave ship bound for the cotton fields, sold in a market down in New Orleans. Scarred old slaver, no, he's doing all right. Hear him whip the women just around midnight. Brown sugar, how come you taste so good? Brown sugar, just like a young girl should. Drums beating, cold English blood runs hot. Lady of the house, wondering where it's gonna stop. Houseboy knows that he's doing all right. You should have heard him just around midnight. Brown sugar, how come you taste so good? Brown sugar, like a young girl should. So basically the song is about an African enslaved young girl who was raped every night around midnight by her enslaver. And he wrote the song. Now, I understand that they went on their geriatric tour and they took it out of rotation. They weren't going to be performing it because someone heard it and listened to the lyrics and kind of called them out on the carpet. And when he was interviewed about it, he said, yeah, when I wrote that, I was like really high. I was really, really high. And a lot of people came to his defense and they were like, well, I don't think he meant any harm by it. He dated black women. I think he has a biracial child or something to that effect. And I was like, well, who else has biracial children? Thomas Jefferson. So we got to stop with that. That's crazy. But anyway, so the whipping post is another form of torture that they are bringing back without the post. And that means that they are deleting us in the midst of the public eye. It's one thing for them to just have their cameras on and they can turn them off or what have you. But they have gotten the patty rollers and the terrorists have gotten so bold that they are deleting us in front of us, and they don't care because they know no one's going to do anything because they, those hands aren't going to get thrown. Rest in peace, Jordan Neely. May he rest in the arms of his ancestors. I know that people were talking about that he was a Michael Jackson impersonator, so people on the subway knew who he was. They talked about how when his mother transitioned, he just really fell apart. And his mother transitioned at the hands of his stepfather. So he was a tortured soul. And what the palm-colored people came out of their thin lips and said? They said, well, he had been arrested 40 times. The person who deleted him didn't have that knowledge. He hadn't seen his arrest record. What he saw was black skin, and that was all he needed to do what he did. So I don't want to be long tonight. I just wanted to do a quick video, audio, podcast. My second episode, yay! Again, I'm going to try to do episode each week and see what happens. Whatever the ancestors, maybe more, depends on what the ancestors want me to get out there and what's happening in the world. I am an edutainer. I like to educate as well as entertain. I am a Jelly Moose. I am an African storyteller. If you've got nothing out of this podcast, I hope you learned something tonight. I hope you learned something. All of my podcasts, all of my episodes will be educational as well as hopefully entertaining. Sunday is Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all of the wonderful mothers out there, whether you birth children or if you are a godmother, a stepmother, an auntie mother, a step grandmother, or whatever it is. If you are walking in your feminine energy and looking after the babies, you are considered, in my book, a mother. I want to read an ancestral mother's prayer to you before I get out of here. It's written by Reverend Mignon Grayson, and she wrote a book, and it's called Ancestor Reverence and Ritual, a beginner's guidebook on how to honor those who have come before. You can get it off Amazon, and no copyright infringement intended. I just want to read this wonderful poem. And it says, I am calling my ancient of ancient mothers, the ones whose names have been lost through the eons of time, the ones who ascended long ago, ascended to their thrones in the stars, the watchers, the healers, the ones with magic in their blood and in their bones, the ones who never spoke with their tongues, because the power they emit is too strong for our ears to hear. They whisper their sacred message teachings with their eyes and with their breath. Their love is so deep, we named it a black hole because we forget that was you sitting there in the immense, unknowable, unfathomable. I miss you, ancient mothers. When I think of you, I remember who I am, that I am of you, and we knew what I came to this earth to do. I call upon you, ancient mothers, whose names have been forgotten through the eons of time. And at this Mother's Day, when my spirit can once again perceive you and feel your love that satisfies my soul and gives me the fortitude to continue, I welcome your whispered kiss and your celestial embrace. I need your nurturing and medicine to heal these battle wounds so that I can rise and be the daughter that you dreamed of, carrying the soul medicine out into the world. Again, this is a prayer, parts of a prayer written by Reverend Mignon Grayson. The book is called Ancestor Reverence and Ritual. I will leave the title of the book in the description. Please go on Amazon and purchase the book. She has not asked me to do this. It's just an amazing book, especially if you are beginning your spiritual journey from Western religion and going back to the African traditional sacred science and sacred spiritual systems. This book is a must-have. It's great for beginners who are just learning how to venerate, honor our ancestors. It's great. Yeah, go online and get this. And I'm going to get out of here now because it is getting late. And I'm old, so it's time for bed. Thank you for joining me. Again, I hope you learned something, and I look forward to speaking with you next time. I don't know what the topic will be. It'll be something good because it's coming from the ancestors. So I say good night, good night, good night. Everyone have a wonderful, blessed evening, and I will talk to you all soon.